Hello, and welcome to Talk Relationship to Me, the show that explores some of the most important relationship topics. I'm Dr. Elana Hoffman. As a clinical psychologist, I focus on all things relationships, from dating to sex to long-term relationships to divorce. I cover it all. I use my professional lens as a psychologist as well as lived experience to cover these topics. Do you need to talk relationships? You're in the right place. Thank you so much for listening. And welcome to my episode about dating after divorce. I talk a lot about this with my clients, and I think that it is listen, there are lots of dating myths in general. But the reason why I'm focusing on myths about dating post-divorce is because this is a particularly important, interesting, complicated time to be dating. And people have lots of preconceived notions about dating after divorce. Should you, shouldn't you, all kinds of things. And so I want to talk specifically about dating after divorce because I think that a lot of people don't really talk about it that much. And people who are wondering whether or not they should date could really benefit from hearing some advice tailored particularly to the divorced space, because there's lots of things to consider in this time. So the first myth that I am going to talk about is that you need to be fully healed before you start dating. So, I see this a lot. I don't even really know what fully healed means. A lot of people will say they need to be healed from their trauma. They need to be healed from their marriage. It just really depends on what we are talking about here. No one is ever fully healed from anything, right? I think, and what I see in my practice is that, growth and healing is really a lifelong practice and a lifelong journey. As cheesy as that sounds, I do believe that it's true. And so there is no kind of fully healed. There's no check mark that you can put next to healed, if you are writing a list. It just doesn't happen that way. The healing is the growth, the understanding, the perspective, the introspection that happens kind of as you move through life and you sort of heal from things. Now, does that mean that if you are in a total, emotional state, in the middle of a divorce, dealing with all kinds of stuff, crying a lot. I mean, crying is cool. Go for it, right? But if you cannot sort of fathom the idea of meeting someone new and kind of keeping it together, then yeah, maybe there is not the right time to jump back into the dating, into dating. But if you kind of if you're sort of on the roller coaster of post-divorce emotions, which is a roller coaster, you don't need to be fully healed to start dating. I think you need to be in a place where you are somewhat steady. You can devote some time to it and some energy to it. Dating is time consuming, energy consuming. And so if you don't really feel like you are in a place to do that, then that is something else. But if you feel like you want to spend the time, you are curious about getting to know someone new, you are curious about doing new activities, you kind of want to sort of put yourself out there in that way, then yeah, go for it, while simultaneously perhaps thinking about what happened in your marriage, your own patterns, everything that you bring into relationships so that you can sort of simultaneously do the work on yourself while you are also engaged in kind of living your life. And I think that that is really important. So no, you do not need to be quote unquote fully healed before you start dating. The second myth is that dating again means you are over your marriage. Again, I'm not really sure, it sort of depends how you define being over your marriage, right? So, I think that marriage, no matter what, whether it was a short one or decades, has an impact, and you have feelings about the ending of your marriage, and that is completely normal. And you can continue to have complicated feelings about the ending of your marriage while you move on. And by move on, I mean, I don't just mean dating. I mean, do lots of other things that are important to you in your life, how you spend your time, how you spend your time at work, with your friends, with your kids, on your hobbies, that is all part of your life too. Now, if you are fully kind of pining for your ex, then that is a different question. But it is okay and normal to have complicated feelings about your marriage, about the ending of your marriage, about your co parent. It's normal to have complicated feelings around that. And you are allowed to do that and also date. So, but dating again doesn't mean that you are really over your marriage. I mean, the truth is that a lot of people are dating who have not resolved these sort of complicated feelings about their marriage and their ex. And to those people, of course, I always suggest coaching or therapy can be very helpful. But, you can kind of do both at the same time, just because, you see someone on the apps. Yes, that does not mean that they are sort of ready to date, that they are over their marriage or over their ex, but you can have complicated feelings and you can continue to date. The third myth is that dating apps are the only way to meet someone after your divorce. That is definitely not true. I have another episode about pros and cons of online dating. And so online dating is one way to meet somebody, but there are lots of ways to meet somebody, especially now. I think that people are kind of a bit over the dating app approach, although a lot of people are still using it. And it is definitely a tool to have in your toolbox of dating people, of a way to meet someone. I think that, again, there are lots of other ways. You just have to be out in the world. You have to practice doing things that you enjoy. You have to practice talking to people. You have to practice eye contact and smiling and being approachable and approaching. You can ask people if they know anyone who's single. You can ask people to set you up. You do have to sort of put yourself out there in that way. If you are serious about meeting somebody and you don't only want to do the apps, then there are definitely other ways to do that. But the apps are not the only way. But of course, again, refer to my episode on the pros and cons of dating. You definitely can meet more people dating online because you just, of course, have access to more people that way than for dating. Everybody is on a dating app to date or hook up or whatever, but there are more opportunities than, meeting someone at the grocery store on a Tuesday or whatever. But it is still possible to do that. It's just a bit of a different approach, and it's sort of more of a long game if you are interested in meeting somebody in real life. But dating apps are definitely not the only way to meet people post-divorce. The other one is about your kids, that you should wait until your kids are older to date. Now, if you have young kids and you are divorced, then you're going to be waiting a long time to date. And, again, if you are really wanting to meet someone, wanting to put yourself out there, wanting to be curious about someone, wanting to get to know someone, and vice versa, and really wanting to date, then you definitely don't have to wait until your kids are older. I definitely recommend dating on your off time, spending your custody time with your kids and dating on your off time. Even if that is limited, it is still, a decent amount of time to date. I recommend limiting babysitters and things like that. I mean, if you have full custody of your kids, then that is a different story. And yes, family, friends, babysitters, things like that to do lots of things, to go out with your friends, to have a life, that is important to do. And dating is, of course, part of that. But when you have your kids, then I recommend, pausing the dating until when you don't have them. If that's not possible, then that is okay. But just, be aware that dating affects your kids, that what you do affects your kids. And that is always true, right? What you do at work affects your kids because it affects your availability and your mental health and your, stress level. And that affects your ability to parent and to be present and to be patient and focused and loving with your kids and all that. So really anything you do, in your life affects your kids. That's true whether or not you're divorced whether or not, whatever your marital status is, this is true. If you're having an argument with your parent, or, things are really stressful at work, it shows up in your parenting. It's impossible not to. That's just human. So divorced or not, that is the case. And so, but divorce is especially, kind of has that, at least that there's that, the dating opportunity, can affect your time with your kids and can affect your kids. And so I definitely recommend, at least doing it while you're not with them, and then, putting whatever supports you need in place to be able to sort of, handle whatever comes your way in terms of dating, right? Whether it's rejection, or, things not going as you planned, or not really knowing what you want, or having to be the one to reject, right? All these things are emotionally taxing, and you want to be able to do it mindfully and kind of intentionally, right? And that intentionally meaning whatever your intention is dating, And again, there's that plug for therapy and coaching. You can get help kind of clarifying what you are intending to do in terms of dating. So you can be really clear with yourself and with prospective dates and partners about where you are at emotionally and psychologically, and especially during this time, during a divorce or post divorce. And so, no, you don't need to wait until your kids are older. The next myth is that the right person will just make everything easier. And this is definitely not true. The idea is, well, if I just found the right partner, my life would be easier. And that is not true. Life is what you make of it, right? And it is dangerous to rely on someone else to make your life easier. And so waiting for the right partner for your life to be easier, things are going to continue to get harder. The right person should make some things easier. In a great partnership, you make each other's lives easier in some ways, but definitely not everything. And things are, hard in a lot of different ways. Again, marital status aside, life can be difficult. It can also be great and, joyous and full of love and optimism and all that. But sometimes, the day to day is hard. It is hard with a divorced person, but the right person is not going to magically make everything easier. And relationships, of course, present difficulties no matter what. Even a wonderful, healthy, committed, loving partnership is hard because you have to be vulnerable. You have to show up. You have to do things that you would not otherwise do. You have to put in the effort, and that is not easy. It is worthwhile for the right thing. Of course, it is worthwhile, but it is not easy. So, this myth that the right partner is going to make everything easy for you is just that. It's just a myth. Although a good partner should make some things easier for you. The next myth, and I hear this a lot, is that you have to look a certain way in order to date again. So you have to lose weight. You have to get a new wardrobe. You have to magically be 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 inches taller. You have to grow hair. All of these things, none of which are true. You are great just as you are, and if you wait until that one of those things are true, then that might never happen. And also, you don't build the confidence. Dating, one of the things that dating after divorce can do is really build confidence, because a lot of people are in relationships for a long time and they don't know how to date. They don't know how to talk. They are clumsy around sex. And so dating and these experiences can give you a lot of confidence that you are dateable, that you have something to offer, that people are going to like you, that people are going to be attracted to you, that people are going to want to have sex with you, that people find you funny and interesting and smart. All of these things come with experience and actually doing it and having those things happen. And then you learn, oh, okay, that you are a certain way. And so waiting until you have some sort of arbitrary goal is, A, it may not happen. And B, I mean, you're not going to magically find 5 inches. And B, it's not going to do anything for your confidence, because the whole point, the whole reason why people often I see get really confident after divorce is because people like them for who they are, what they look like, and just as they are. There is a lid for every pot, and that is true. So if height matters to someone, then they're not for you. If weight matters to someone, then they're not for you. All of these things, you just show up as you are, and the right people, you know, will find you for whatever that relationship might be, whether it's one date or whether it's a long-term relationship or whether it's a 6 month thing, whatever it is. If you are authentically you, and that means you right now, today, as you are, if you show up that way, then whatever happens will happen. And if someone doesn't like you, then they're not the right fit, and vice versa. But you do not have to wait until whatever you feel like you need to show up in a certain way to date, at least not, certainly physically. And what I was saying before about the myth of healing yourself, you do need to be um, doing some learning and introspection and growth and all that. I mean, I definitely recommend people do that at this time in their life. This is a really great time to do that. So, if you are doing that, then that is great, but you cannot be, fully healed, fully ready, fully, however it is that you and your mind are telling you need to be a certain way in order to date. So if you want to date and you want to get out there and you, again, want to learn about people, you want to explore, you're curious, you're optimistic, then I would say, you can date and you can learn about yourself. And again, you don't need to wait for that 5 pounds or 20 pounds or whatever it is. The next one I was going to talk about that I sort of already covered is that dating won't impact your kids. Just quickly, again, it will, of course it will. Like anything you do is going to impact your kids. So just proceed mindfully with that. Of course, follow any kind of agreement that if you have in your divorce agreement that you won't introduce someone until a certain amount of time or until they meet their co-parent or whatever it is, follow that. Otherwise, just really think about what the relationship is before you introduce someone to your kids. This is a big deal. You want kids to have as much stability as possible. Of course, people come in and out of your life regardless, right? Friends, their friendships change, friends move away, teachers, coaches, things like that. And those are all important sort of life experiences, learning experiences, but you don't need to create more potential for that than what is already there in your kid's life. And listen, if you introduce someone that doesn't work out, of course that is life. And, you can be there for them and help them through, that loss for them if that's how they feel about it. But, just try to make sure that things are kind of serious or they're headed in that direction before you introduce your kids to a partner. This is like a whole other major topic, of course, but this is just briefly, your dating impacts your kids, whether or not, they're directly meeting somebody or it's just impacting you positively or negatively. You could be, on the high of new relationship energy, and then you could be, giving your kids everything they want. You could be in a super good mood all the time and buying them gifts and taking them places and doing all these things because you're feeling really happy and high on the dopamine of a new relationship. So, dating impacts your kids regardless, positive or negative, in multiple ways. It does. Even if, again, like I said before, you do it on your off time, things affect your mental state. And so your mental state, of course, affects your kids. So that is just something to think about. The other myth that is also unfortunately not true is that if you're dating, you must know what you want. That is definitely not true. The idea is that you can learn what you want, and it's sort of this catch-22 because you don't really know what you want unless you're dating and experiencing it. But you just want to be careful in the process of leading someone on, hurting someone's feelings, because you don't know what you want. So it is not true that everybody who is dating knows what they want, but maybe you are in the process of figuring it out, and you can be honest about that. You can be honest with yourself, and you can be honest with prospective dates and partners that you're not really sure what you're looking for, that you're kind of figuring it out, and that is okay, and that is great. That is just where you are. There are lots of people in that boat, and you guys can, find each other and figure it out together. Or, if it gets to a point where you're realizing that something is not what you were looking for, then, you can end it. And that is also okay. And of course, I talk a lot about that, about breakups, about ending relationships, how that is ultimately a good thing. Even if you hurt someone, that is good. That's a good thing. It means you're being honest. You can, of course, do it in a kind way. But, that was important to do. So yes, if you're dating, you don't necessarily know what you want, but hopefully You are in the process of figuring it out, which is experiencing it, thinking about it, what I like about this person, what did I not like about this person, what do I want from this, what do I think they want from this, am I going to hurt them? These are all kinds of questions to think through and ask yourself as you are moving through the process. And again, coaching and therapy can be very helpful in these situations. This last myth that, again, could be a whole other topic and probably will be a whole other podcast is that you're a bad person if you end it. This is the biggest myth and a potentially very harmful one because it keeps people in relationships that they don't want to be in. And it keeps people with people that they're not attracted to or who they don't see a future with for any number of reasons. There's lots of reasons why somebody might not want a full, what might not be interested. And whatever that reason is, that is okay. But the opposite is true. You are hurting someone far more in the long run if you do not end it than if you end it when you know that something isn't working, it's not going the way that you would want it to, they want more than you want to give, or vice versa, or you're just not into someone, you don't want to hurt their feelings, right? It is okay. You're not a bad person if you end it. You are a kind person if you end it when you are not feeling it. And that is the nice, kind, respectful thing to do, confident thing to do, and not easy. It's not easy to do, especially if you don't like disappointing people, you're not used to hurting people, this also comes from a family, often there are family of origin reasons why people stay in relationships where it's not working. One of these reasons could be that people are afraid to hurt or disappoint someone. And so that is a huge thing that I talk about with a lot of my clients, is that it's okay to end something and it is the other person is better off and you are better off because you learn that you can handle it, you can do it, you can handle their disappointment, you can handle their hurt feelings, you can handle their big emotions or whatever it is, small emotions, So that's a big one that I talk a lot about that I could do a whole other episode on, but that is really an important myth that I wanted to make sure to cover. So if any of this resonates with you, let me know. If I missed any important post-dating myths, let me know that too. I'm happy to do more episodes on this. I think there probably are many more. There's lots of dating myths and lots of myths, that keep people from dating, especially post-divorce. But these are just a handful that I wanted to make sure to cover. So if you are in this position of dating after divorce, feel free to chime into the conversation. I think it is a really important one. This has been Talk Relationship to Me, produced by Peach Island Productions. I'm Dr. Elana Hoffman. Do you have a question about relationships? I'd love to hear from you. You can find me on my website at drelanahoffman.com, or you can find me on Instagram at dr.elanahoffman. You can find everything you need, including more about today's episode, in the show description. And if you have questions or comments about today's episode, I would love to hear from you. You could inspire a podcast topic. So thank you so much for listening, and until next time.